every time you rub your fingertips together, every time you focus on your little toes, every time you focus on your sense of sound, of hearing, this is what you're doing. You're reducing your thinking level.
Hi and welcome to Lead Well.
Have you ever thought about your thinking levels? Well, if you're familiar with the trust technique, you probably have, because that's one of the concepts that we are using pretty heavily. And I love it so much that I wanted to share that with you all, because I think it not only applies for the work with our animals, but it can also apply for ourselves and also for any type of interaction we have with someone else. Now, let me introduce you to this idea of thinking levels. When you are really tired and almost falling asleep, I bet that the movement in your head is getting really slow. Not a lot of things going on in there. If you're very excited, anxious, fearful, or even angry, there is a lot of movement there. There is not a lot of thoughts maybe, but a lot of movement. Usually there is one thought that is really sticking there and it's rushing around in the brain. And so this is why in the trust technique, we call this energy level, or the level of arousal, really thinking levels, to make it easier to grasp. Because what we want to do there is, our aim is to reduce our thinking levels, because with a reduced thinking level, everything becomes much easier. For example, if you are really angry or really anxious, it's hard to learn anything new, because your brain is so focused on the one thing it wants to run away from or it wants to fight against. If you are in a relaxed state with a lower thinking level, you're open to observe the world. In the trust technique, we also describe it like if we are looking at the world through big eyes, it's a completely different observation than if we look at the world through half-closed eyes, really relaxed. I can take in things much easier because my thinking is slower. Now, how can we describe thinking levels? In the trust technique, we use 10 hypothetical levels. And let me start with the highest level, 10. If I'm in a 10 state, there is nothing I'm looking at, just the one thing that makes me afraid or makes me angry. And there is only one thing I want to do, is I want to run away or I want to fight. Or if I can't do it, I freeze, because I just stay there and expect the worst. And the same is still true at 9, 8. 7, that is where I'm still in a very high thinking level. That's still, I'm really looking around. But if there is someone approaching me, I probably can pay attention to them. 6, 5, 4, and even 3, those are great levels to learn. 2 is when I start getting sleepy. 1 is when I'm really asleep already or half asleep, and 0 is flat out. I love using dogs to actually illustrate thinking levels, because it's so easy with them to observe. Like 10, 9, 8, that's a dog that is really jumping in the leash and barking and biting whoever is coming close. Really out of their mind almost. And they are out of their mind because they can't think clearly. In that situation, if you're approaching a dog in that situation, they cannot react to what you do. If you're approaching a horse in that situation, they cannot listen. And if you're approaching a child in that situation, it's the same. And an adult, it's exactly the same. So if you have a coworker, if you have a neighbor, if they are really afraid or really angry, the best thing you can do is to get them out of this state. Move them away from makes them angry and or anxious, so that you can then start talking to them and start working with them. Now, a dog at 6 is still standing up, but they start to listen. At a 5, they will sit down. At a 4, they will lie down, but the head is still up. At a 3, they will lie down their head, usually on their paws. At a 2, you will see the eyes closing. It's almost like they fight against falling asleep. At a 1, they have their eyes closed. You think that they're asleep. But if there is the minus noise, for example, they will be fully awake again. And a 0 is they are lying flat on their side. Sometimes there is a bit of twitching. For people, that's the REM state. And you can listen back to the episode about sleep where I talk about this REM state quite a bit. So for our animals, that's the state where healing happens. For us as well, REM state, especially when introduced by such a process of lowering the thinking level, is a very healing state. Now, of course, we don't want to run around, because we can't, in a level 0 or 1, not even a 2. But 3, 4, 5, those are the perfect levels to interact. Those are the perfect levels to learn. We're open. Our mind is open. Our mind is really broad. It's open to receive, and it's open to progress information that it's getting. So how can you work with thinking levels? When you think about your animals, be aware of the thinking levels. And if you feel the thinking level is rising, do your very best to lower them. In the trust technique, we have a fantastic, very, very easy way of doing that. Also, because if a dog, for example, is always on a very high thinking level, not in panic, not angry, but around 6 or 7, the threshold to get into a panic state, the threshold to get into an aggressive state is very, very low. So when you are lowering their thinking levels overall, then they will not get there that easily. And the same is for you, because the trust technique, believe it or not, even if it's work with animals and their people, the main focus really is on people, because as a person, we also learn to lower our thinking levels on purpose, wherever we need that and whenever we need it. And by the way, the same effect can be seen in children. When you start lowering your thinking levels, it usually has an effect on them as well, because we're sharing feelings. Not only our animals and we humans, but also we humans overall. We are sharing feelings. Now think about situations at work where you were speaking with people who are very anxious or very angry. And think about your reaction. Were you able to actually control your emotions when dealing with that? Or did you catch up with them? Because again, emotions can be contagious. So if someone is really, really anxious, that affects us. And it requires a lot of self-awareness and also a lot of practice to then stay calm. Because of course, it's much easier to find a solution when I am in a calmer state. Now, you can play with that. Think about all the things that help you calm down your thinking. And think about situations where you have a really high thinking level and what you could do in those situations to actually affect it. By the way, in the trust technique, we go ahead in 3 different steps. So first of all, we train ourselves and our animals to stay at the lower thinking levels at all times. Because of course, as I said, the threshold to the very high, non-regulated thinking level is then higher. But there are those situations where things happen. And so the next application is to actually apply the trust technique after the fact so that our high thinking levels get down pretty quickly. Because if you think about it, if you have a high stress, because it's nothing else than a high stress situation, and you're not actively impacting it, that usually it takes some time to go away. So your body takes some time to recover from those stress hormones. But if you have a method like the trust technique to actually calm down, relax immediately after such a situation, the level of stress hormones in your body is much lower. And then going forward, you can anticipate situations. So when I go on a walk with a dog, I can anticipate, okay, at that corner, usually there is another dog coming. So before that happens, I lower our thinking levels so that we can go into that situation in a more relaxed way. And when you practice that on an ongoing basis, and it doesn't take that long, then you can impact the situation as it occurs. But that's a black belt activity. So to be able to do that, you have to practice first. And that's what I invite you to do. Find your best way. And of course, I'm here to introduce you to the trust technique as well. And also, I have shared with you a lot of these little exercises already that you can use to actually slow down your thinking, because that's exactly what they do. Every time you rub your fingertips together, every time you focus on your little toes, every time you focus on your sense of sound, of hearing, this is what you're doing. You're reducing your thinking level. Now, what I invite you to do for the next week is to actually observe thinking levels. I have given you the levels for the dog. So 10, 9, 8, really barking, shouting, and being really aggressive. 7, 6, that's when they start slowing down, still on their feet, and still looking around pretty interested. 5, that's when they can listen enough to sit down. 4, they lie down. 3, they lay down their heads. 2, eyes start closing. 1, you think they're asleep. And 0, they're flat out. So I invite you to observe thinking levels in animals that you come across. If there is a dog in the street, start thinking about their thinking levels. If you see children running around, start thinking about their thinking levels. What level are they in? Family members, co-workers. Is there a co-worker who has usually very high thinking levels versus another one who has lower thinking levels? Think about that. Start observing it. Start really being aware of it. because also you have thinking levels. So start recognizing your own thinking levels and beware of high thinking levels, because we have been talking about the autonomic nervous system at the very beginning of the podcast. So the nervous system that regulates our states of either being in a fight or flight mode versus being in a living mode. And every time I'm lowering my thinking levels, I activate that nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, that helps my body to survive. And every time my thinking level rises, I activate the sympathetic nervous system that is preparing me to run or defend myself. So if you think about it that way, observe the thinking levels and then observe also their movement. Which direction are they going in? And I'm really curious to hear about your findings there, because I think being aware of it is already the first step into change. So thank you for today. I hope you found the trust technique thinking level concept interesting, and you will now go out and observe animals and dogs and cats and horses and also people. And may you always lead well yourself and others. Bye for now.
This was Lead Well. Now, what is the one thing that you're taking away from this episode? Please share in the comments below, and do share the podcast with your friends and family, but only if you like it.